The night started like any other. I just parked my car and was headed to the front entrance when something unexpected drew my attention. A faint glimmer on the ground. It was a telephone. I picked it up, puzzled. It was not mine. As I peered at the computer, the message struck me like a freight train. "Is my foolish hubby done? I need the insurance money right away." The text reads. For a second, I froze, my mind racing. The sender's name is Chelsea, my wife. My heart has stopped. My fingers trembled as I stared at the computer, my mind a mixture of bewilderment and wrath. Could this actually be happening? I tapped the tablet and scrolled through the latest messages. Each syllable was like a blade slashing through my chest. They weren't only talking about me, they were plotting something nasty. My thoughts raced, attempting to fit everything together. Who was the recipient? What had Chelsea been keeping from me for months? The unexpected work excursions, the discreet phone calls, the coldness in her voice. Everything made sense. Now. For years I had given her everything, trust, love, and stability. And here was my reward. To be plotted against as a stepping stone in some perverse strategy. I felt a surge of rage through me, hotter and fiercer than I'd ever experienced. But amid the wrath, there was more clarity. I had a choice. Confront her right away or play along and discover the full scope of her betrayal. The answer occurred to me just as fast as the concept. I responded to the message. All done. I'll meet to collect the remainder of the cash, if they thought I was a bumbling idiot. They were about to discover how mistaken they were. As I opened the front door to my home that night, I could hear light laughter coming from the living room. Chelsea's voice echoed, followed by a man's low chuckle. They were drinking and partying, utterly ignorant of the approaching storm. And I stood in the doorway, watching and waiting, my blood boiling and my mind racing. The betrayal had reached its climax, and now it was my turn. I stood at the doorway, grasping the phone hard, my chest heaving with rage and dismay. Chelsea, my wife of 6 years, sat on the couch, giggling. I didn't recognize the man next to her. Tall, haughty. His arm rested carelessly across the back of the couch, as if he owned the place. She did not notice me at first. She was too busy clinking glasses with him, smiling like I hadn't seen in years. For a minute, all I did was watch. My mind was racing, attempting to comprehend the scope of what I had discovered. This wasn't simply infidelity. This was something darker. She wasn't simply betraying me for another man. She was conspiring against me, planning something terrible, and the text insurance money. What type of individual would do that? They had not seen me yet. My shoes were still off from outside, and I stood silently in the shadows, my heart pounding in my ears. I'm not sure what kept me back from barging in and confronting them right then. But something told me to wait and listen. "Do you think he suspects anything?" The man questioned her, swirling his wine glass lazily. Chelsea smirked and leaned back into him. "Come on, Mark. Do you know him? He's overly trusting. He'd believe me if I told him I was going to Mars for business purposes. He doesn't ask questions." Mark. That was his name, of course, the one she had been texting all along. "Still," Mark said, his tone becoming increasingly serious. "If things don't go as planned, there may be consequences. Are you sure you want to do this?" Her laugh was frigid and somewhat contemptuous. "Of course it is. Do you think I want to remain married to a dull, predictable man who spends more time at work than with me? I deserved better. And after everything is finished, the payoff will provide us with a secure financial future. He'll only be a memory, a dumb and naive remembrance." Every word struck me like a physical blow, stupid and clueless, predictable. The rage bubbled up inside me like a volcano about to erupt. But I forced myself to remain calm. Exploding now would not provide me with the answers I sought. I sneaked back out of the house, my thoughts racing. It was all quite bizarre. Chelsea, The woman I once loved. The woman I thought I knew was working with this person to delete me. And for what? Money. Freedom. The pieces began to fall into place as I paced outdoors, attempting to breathe through the rage that threatened to overtake me. Late nights, remote conduct, and contemptuous attitude. Whenever I tried to get closer to her, everything made sense. Now. She wasn't just withdrawing due to some foolish marital downturn. She was creating distance, created a world in which I did not exist. I sat in my car, squeezing the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles became white. I had two options: storm inside and face them. Alternatively, play it smart and acquire additional evidence. Every part of me wanted to walk back inside and pull them both out by their collars, demand answers, scream at them, make them pay for what they did to me. But deep inside, I knew that was not the way. Not yet. I unlocked my phone and took a long breath, rehashing the last hour in my head. The text message and discussion I overheard. My intuition told me this was more than simply infidelity. It was criminal. They were planning something bigger, more premeditated, and if I played my cards correctly, I could use their own plan against them. First, I forwarded Chelsea's SMS to my phone. I needed confirmation, something real, to tell myself that I wasn't hallucinating anything. Then I photographed the messages and put them in a secure folder. Next, I drove to a neighboring park so I could think straight. The chilly night air did little to soothe me, but it provided the space I required to strategize. If Chelsea and Mark thought they could outsmart me, they were about to discover how incorrect they were. The first thing I did was phone my old pal, Jake. We had served together in the military, and he was the one person I could trust. Jake was the type of person who could handle any scenario, and I wanted someone on my side who was willing to get their hands filthy. "Jake," I said as he picked up my voice. Steady, but tense. "I need your help. Is everything okay?" he inquired, his tone changing abruptly. "Serious?" "Not even close. Listen, I can't explain everything on the phone, but I just found out Chelsea has been seeing someone. They're not merely planning something harmful. I need someone to look after my back." Jake didn't ask any questions. That's the type of guy he was. Say nothing more. "Tell me where you are, and I will be there." We arranged to meet the next morning. For the time being, I needed to get through the night without engaging in any hazardous behavior. My rage simmered just beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any time. But I kept urging myself to be patient. This wasn't merely to expose Chelsea. It was all about outsmarting her. As I drove home with my hands still trembling, I realized something. This was not over. Definitely not. Chelsea and her beau believed they had me figured out. I thought I was simply a naive fool. However, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The previous night's fury had subsided, becoming sharper and more focused the next morning. I wasn't just a man betrayed. I was a man with a goal. Chelsea and Mark believed they had everything sorted out. But they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to lie over and let them wreck my life. I met Jake in a diner just outside town. When I stepped in, he was already seated, nursing a cup of coffee and wearing the same calm, no-nonsense attitude he'd had throughout our years in the service. "Spill," he murmured as I slid into the booth across from him. I lay everything out for him. The text, the overheard conversation, and the conclusion that Chelsea and Mark were planning something with my insurance money. Jake listened without interrupting, keeping his piercing eyes on me the entire time. When I finished, he leaned back in his seat and whistled softly. "Damn," he said, "that is frigid, even if someone is cheating." "So what is the plan?" "That's where I need your help," I explained. "I need to know who this guy is, what they have planned, and how far they are willing to go. And when the time comes, I'll make sure they both suffer the consequences of their actions." Jake had already nodded and entered problem-solving mode. The first step is to find out who this Mark man is. If he's brazen enough to sit in your home and joke about screwing you over, he's either arrogant, ignorant, or both. Do you have any clue where they could meet up? Somewhere we can capture him alone. I thought about it. Chelsea has been leaving for hours at a time recently, claiming to be running errands or meeting a friend. I'd never thought much about it before. God, how naive I had been. But now those reasons felt like breadcrumbs leading me right to her lies. "There is a hotel on 7th Street," I said after a time. "She's mentioned it several times. She said it's where her reading club meets." Jake smirked. "Book club?" Classic. We decided to stake out the motel that afternoon. Jake would manage the surveillance. I wasn't in the right frame of mind to sit quietly and observe while he put his gear together. I spent the rest of the morning going through the texts I had forwarded from Chelsea's phone, seeking for anything I could have overlooked. One particular message stood out. "Make sure everything is ready for Friday. We cannot afford any mistakes." Today was Wednesday. Whatever they were plotting, it would happen soon. By the time I encountered Jake again, he had a camera, a notebook, and the quiet persistence that had made him a legend in our unit. We parked a block from the motel and waited. Hours have passed. The sun lowered in the sky and the streetlights began to flicker on, just as I was beginning to worry if we had wasted our time. Jake nudged me and pointed. He stated Chelsea was entering the hotel. Her head was held high, her phone in hand. She was dressed to kill in heels, a tight dress, and a glamorous haircut, as if she were going to a prestigious function. My stomach turned at the sight of her. This was the woman I had spent my life with. I trusted this woman more than anyone else. And now she was strolling inside a hotel to meet her lover, utterly ignorant that her deception was crumbling all around her. Jake took a couple photographs as she disappeared inside. "Now we wait," he said. We did not have to wait long. 10 minutes later, Mark arrived. He seemed even pompous in person, walking into the hotel as if he owned it. Jake took 2 shots of himself before leaning back in his seat. "Satisfied? That's our guy," he explained. "Now let us find out who he truly is." Jake had tremendous resources, to say the least. Within an hour, he had traced down Mark's full identity, residence, and criminal record, which revealed extensive fraud and assault. Even a stint in prison for embezzlement. Jake scrolled over the information on his laptop and said, "This guy is a professional con artist. He presumably became attached to Chelsea because he perceived an easy victim. Someone with money, who he might control." The thought caused my blood to boil. Chelsea wasn't only betraying me. She was teaming up with a predator, someone who saw her as a tool to advance his own agenda. We need more. I mentioned something that links them to whatever they have planned for Friday. Something I can use to bring them both down. Jake nodded. "Leave it to me. I will tell him. See what I can find. In the meantime, keep your calm. Do not give her a hint." That night I went home and pretended everything was normal. Chelsea greeted me with a skin-crawling smile. She kissed my cheek and asked about my day as if she hadn't spent the afternoon in a hotel with her lover. But I played my role, pretending not to notice the lingering aroma of his cologne or the way she avoided looking at me. Friday. I reflected as I sat across from her at dinner, forced myself to eat. Whatever you have planned, I will be ready. The next day felt like an eternity, every time Chelsea crossed my way, smiling as though nothing was wrong. It took everything in me to keep my emotions under control. I kept repeating the scene the night before when she walked into that motel. Mark follows her as if they own the planet. The lies and betrayal. It ignited the fire within me, but I could not let it show. Not yet. Jake contacted in the afternoon to provide an update. I followed Mark after he had left the motel. He said, "You won't like this." He met with someone else. Another dude. They exchanged something. It looked like a folder. I snapped a couple photos, but they are grainy. What do you believe it was? I questioned, tightening my grasp on the phone. It might be paperwork. It may be cash. Whatever it was, it did not seem like a nice conversation. My guess, their plan is more in-depth than you realize. Deeper? Of course it happened. Chelsea was not the sort to do things halfway, and Mark appeared like the type of person who thrived in chaos. Together, they were a ticking time bomb. Jake continued, I have a tail on him now. He'll meet someone else tomorrow. I'll keep digging, but you need to be prepared. If Friday is their big day, you have less than 48 hours to decide how to handle it. Following the call, I sat in my car for a long time, staring out the window. My mind raced, but I forced myself to concentrate. Jake was correct. I needed a plan. It wasn't only about confronting Chelsea and Mark anymore. This was about stopping them before they could carry out whatever scheme they had planned. Chelsea was quite chatty that evening. She discussed her day, a conference she had to attend the next evening, and how she was organizing a surprise for me soon. The boldness of it made my stomach turn, but I smiled and nodded, seeming to know nothing. A surprise? I asked, playing along. She smiled softly, but her eyes deceived her. You will see. Please be patient. Patience. That word feels different now. Patience was what kept me alive in war zones, what has helped me get over impossible conditions, and now it held the secret to outwitting Chelsea and her beau. The following day, I collaborated with Jake to prepare. He'd learned more about Mark's illicit ties. Apparently, the man had a history of framing others to take the blame for his plans and then fleeing before the consequences were apparent. This guy's a professional. Jake warned me as we discussed the details. If you confront him directly, he will find a way to get out of it. You should think like him. Stay 2 steps ahead. That's when an idea hit me. What if we give them just what they're looking for? I said. Jake lifted his eyebrow. Do you mean insurance money? Their entire scheme relies around cashing in on my policy, correct? Let's make them believe it's working. If we play this right, we'll be able to capture them before they understand what's going on. Jake smirked. Now you're talking. What do you need? We spent hours developing the plan. I would not merely confront Chelsea and Mark. I would let them believe they had succeeded, then reveal their scheme at the ideal time. It was hazardous, but it was the only way to ensure they did not get away. That night, I returned home with an unusual sensation of tranquility. Chelsea was already in bed and scrolling through her phone. She hardly looked up as I went in, muttering something about being weary from running errands. I looked at her for a time, wondering how she could lie so effortlessly, how she could sit there and act everything was normal. Part of me wanted to yell at her and demand answers, but I realized it wasn't the time. Instead, I went into bed and looked at the ceiling. My thoughts raced. Tomorrow was Friday. They had a planned day. Everything is around. Whatever they were planning was going to come to a head, and I wanted to be prepared. I slipped out of bed before early and met Jake. He had everything ready: cameras, microphones, and a couple of hidden trackers. We had placed a gadget in Chelsea's car the night before to track her movements. The hours building up to Friday evening seemed like a countdown to battle. I stayed out of the house, appearing to be busy at work, while Jake followed Mark and kept me updated. Mark has just met with Chelsea. He stated that they would be leaving for a different place in the afternoon. It seems like an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. A warehouse. My stomach turned. This was bigger than I expected. Jake's voice was harsh. Take care, guy. If this goes wrong, these folks will not hesitate to hide their tracks. You are not just dealing with an unfaithful wife. You are dealing with criminals. I nodded, despite his inability to see me. I have things under control. By the time the sun went down, I was parked a block away from the warehouse, waiting. My heart raced, but my mind was clear. I wasn't simply stepping into a trap. I was springing one on my own. When Chelsea and Mark arrived, I watched through binoculars as they went inside. Jake was stationed nearby, watching everything through the covert cameras we had installed earlier. This is it, I thought as I stepped out of the car, hands clenched. Whatever they had planned, I was about to put a stop to it. The atmosphere around the warehouse was thick with stress. My heart pounded in my chest as I neared the side entrance. "Take care to stay in the shadows," Jake's voice crackled lightly into my earpiece. "They are inside. For the time being, it appears that only the two of them are present," he said. "Be wise. We got this." I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me, my movements were light and controlled. I wasn't simply walking into a conflict. I was headed into a battleground where I had to outthink and outmaneuver two people who had already betrayed me on every level. Inside, the warehouse was poorly lighted, with scattered shafts of light filtering through the cracked windows. The sound of Chelsea's voice hit me first, followed by Mark's low, smug laughter. I moved closer, peering around a stack of containers. They were standing at a table covered in papers, including what appeared to be my personal documents, insurance applications, military service records, and even copies of my ID. My blood boiled. How had they gotten their hands on all of this? Chelsea exclaimed enthusiastically. "This is perfect. Once this is completed, there is no going back. We will have everything we need." Mark smiled, leaning on the table. "You're certain he doesn't suspect anything?" Chelsea rolled her eyes. "Please, you know how clueless he is. For years I've been playing the role of the perfect wife. He doesn't ask questions or notice while I'm gone for hours. By the time he realizes what's going on, we'll be sipping cocktails on the beach." The casual malice in her tone astounded me. This was not the woman I expected to marry. This was someone else completely. Cold, calculating, heartless. Mark reached for a folder and pulled out what appeared to be a contract. "Okay, let's go over the timeline again. Tonight we make the decision. By tomorrow, everything will be in action. Once the documentation is completed, we will be free to complete the call." My thoughts raced. What call were they discussing? I strained to hear more, my fists squeezed so fiercely that my knuckles ached. Chelsea smirked. "Relax, Mark. Everything's taken care of. By the time someone asks, the money will have been deposited into our account, and She trailed off. Her smirk grows wider. "So he won't ask any questions, will he?" Mark laughed, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. This was not only a scheme to defraud me, it was much darker. They weren't simply seeking to steal from me. They were attempting to eliminate me. Jake's voice came from the earphone. "Are you hearing this? They're preparing you for something major. You need to act quickly." I took a deep breath and forced myself to remain calm. Storming in now might be enjoyable, but it would not fix anything. I needed to capture them in the act, leaving no room for escape. I pressed the button on a little device in my pocket. Activating the covert cameras Jake has previously set. Their talk was being taped. Every incriminating phrase is recorded as evidence. But I wasn't finished yet. I needed more. Chelsea's phone vibrated on the table, catching her attention. She retrieved it and read the message. Her look shifted to one of satisfaction. "That's our guy," she replied, holding out the screen to indicate. "He'll finish off the loose ends tonight. By tomorrow, everything will be over. Loose endings." My blood became chilly. They weren't simply talking about getting rid of me. They'd paid someone to do it. Mark clinked his glass with hers. "To a fresh start," he replied, smirking. Chelsea raised her glass, her smile poisonous at liberation. I'd heard enough. I quietly snuck back outside and made my way to Jake's car, where he was watching the live stream from the cameras. His expression was gloomy as I moved into the passenger seat. "They intend to relocate tonight," I said. "They have someone else involved, someone responsible for tying up loose ends." Jake's jaw constricted. "This is just getting worse. You have two alternatives. Confront them immediately or let the situation play out and catch them red-handed? I shake my head. Not yet. If they believe they've won, they'll become sloppy. Let's follow them tonight and see where things go. If they're going to meet someone else, we need to know who. Jake nodded. All right, but if things go south, we'll move in. Agreed? Agreed. The hours that followed were among the longest of my life. We followed Chelsea and Mark as they left the warehouse, driving to a calm residential area on the outskirts of town. They stopped in front of a rundown house and walked inside, where they remained for about an hour before being joined by a third man, a massive person with a terrible demeanor. Jake mumbled as he took pictures through the car's tinted windows. They had a brief conversation before parting ways. Chelsea and Mark drove off in one way, leaving the third man on foot, disappearing into the dark. Follow him. I said, I need to know what he has planned. Jake thought for a bit before nodding. We followed the man to a motel on the outskirts of town, where he checked in and went into his room. We've got him, Jake said, pulling out his laptop to set up a live video stream. Now we're waiting. I slumped back in my seat, my thoughts whirling. This was far bigger than I had thought. Chelsea and Mark weren't simply cheating. They were plotting my ruin, playing a risky gamble with my life. But they'd underestimated me. They assumed I was clueless. They assumed I was weak. But tomorrow they'd discover how mistaken they were. The following morning, a bleak determination settled over me. The elements of Chelsea and Mark's plan were coming together, and it was worse than I could have predicted. Not only were they planning to cash in on my insurance, but they'd also brought in a third man, someone who was obviously supposed to be the muscle. Loose endings. They addressed me as if I were a nuisance to be eliminated. Jake and I spent the early hours studying the motel film. The man had remained inside all night, only emerging briefly to make a phone call. We recorded some of it, something about having everything in place, and tonight is the night. Tonight. It all happened tonight. Jake slumped back in his chair, brow wrinkled. We have sufficient proof to blast this wide open. Between the chats, the photographs, and the video, they will not have a chance in court. I shake my head. That isn't enough. They're arrogant. They believe they have already won. If we take this to the police right now, they'll just lawyer up and spin a tale. I need them caught in the act with no way to escape. Jake sighed but did not argue. He knew me well enough to know that I wouldn't back down. We spent the day preparing. Jake hacked into the motel's security feed, allowing us direct access to the cameras. Meanwhile, I sorted through the documents Chelsea and Mark had left at the warehouse, attempting to piece together the final phases of their plan. Among the papers was a forged death certificate. My death certificate? It was already completed with today's date. My stomach turned as I glanced at it. This was more than just a con. This was premeditated cold, calculated. By mid-afternoon, Jake had followed Chelsea and Mark's movements. They were back at the warehouse, meeting with the third man on the camera stream. It was evident that they were finalizing things. Chelsea was laughing, her body language relaxed, and Mark pointed confidently. They assumed everything was under control, but they had no idea. I was going to turn the tables. As the sun went down, Jake and I drove to the motel where the third man was staying. We parked a block away and waited, watching him emerge from his room with a duffel bag draped over his shoulder. He got into a black vehicle and drove out of the lot. Jake stated as he started the car, "He's on the move." We followed him from a safe distance. My heart is beating with eagerness. The automobile wound through the downtown streets before traveling to the outskirts of town, eventually parking in a quiet, wooded location. The man got out and vanished into the trees. Jake parked a few hundred yards away, and we proceeded on foot. The woods were hauntingly calm as they remained low and quiet. The only sounds we hear are the crunch of leaves beneath our boots and the distant buzz of traffic ahead. We saw the man standing near a tiny trench. He was dumping something in it. Documents, several bits of what appeared to be electronics. My stomach fell as I realized what he was doing. Jake said, "He's getting rid of evidence." We filmed everything. The man was caught on video lighting a match and setting the pile on fire. The flames highlighted his face, which was cool and concentrated. This was not a first-timer. He had done this previously. After he went, we approached the pit. The majority of the papers had already been burned beyond recognition, but a few shreds remained intact. Jake carefully removed them with tongs and placed them in a zippered bag. He stated this might assist, but we were still lacking the major event. When we returned to the warehouse, the atmosphere was electric and tense. Chelsea, Mark, and the third man were all present, moving around the table while checking their phones. Jake and I were stationed in a nearby van, watching through hidden cameras. "They're waiting for something," Jake explained. His eyes were fixated on the television. A few moments later, a fourth individual entered the warehouse, someone we had never seen before. He was older, wearing a suit, and exuded authority. Chelsea greeted him enthusiastically, shaking hands, and offered him a drink. "This is it," I mumbled. "This is the one who is tugging the strings." The gathering assembled at the table. Their voices were low but clear enough to register on the microphones. They were talking about logistics, verifying times and locations. Chelsea was in her element, charming and confident, while Mark leaned against the wall, smiling smugly. "Everything is ready." The older man spoke. "The policy expires tomorrow morning, and there will be nothing traceable back to any of us." Chelsea raised her glass to a clear slate. She said, her smile razor-sharp. The others clinked their glasses, and their laughter echoed throughout the warehouse. Jake looked at me. "We got them. Let us call it in." "Not yet," I said, my voice tight. I had to be the one to confront her. I need her to understand she did not get away with this. Jake hesitated but nodded. "Okay, but I'll have backup on standby in case this goes wrong. I'm going to pull you out." I took a long breath, bracing myself. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was not only going to reveal their scheme, I was going to make sure they felt the full consequences of their betrayal. I slid out of the van and approached the warehouse. Despite the fury roaring inside me, I kept my steps steady as I pushed the door open. The gathering froze, and their laughter died away. Chelsea's cheeks turned pale when her eyes met mine. "Hello, Chelsea," I said, my voice calm, yet cold. "Miss me?" Her glass dropped from her grasp and shattered on the floor. Mark stepped forward, his face twisted in rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" I smirked as I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Oh, I just thought I'd join the party and share some recordings while I was at it." As they realized what was going on, the color faded from their faces. They were trapped, and the game was finally finished. The warehouse was dead silent, the kind of stillness that causes the air to feel thick. Chelsea stood transfixed, her face pale, while Mark shifted nervously. The elder man, who I presumed was the genius, narrowed his gaze at me. His posture stiffened, like a cornered predator. The third man, the so-called muscle, took a stride toward me, but I did not react. My speech sliced through the tension like a razor. "Funny thing about treachery," I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket. "People you believe are too foolish to catch on. They generally end up shocking you." Chelsea eventually found her voice, albeit shaky. "What exactly are you talking about? You should not be here. It has nothing to do with you." I interrupted her with a strong tone. "Nothing to do with me." "Really? Because last I checked, conspiring to fake my death and cash in on my insurance policy is entirely up to me." Her jaw fell, and for a moment I thought she was going to deny it. But then Mark walked in, his face twisted in displeasure. "Let me guess," he scoffed. "Do you think you have us all figured out? You are here to play the big hero, right? Well, friend, this does not change anything." I smirked and took out the controller Jake had given me. "That's where you go wrong, Mark." With a single button press, the covert cameras we'd set across the warehouse flashed red, signaling that they were live streaming. Say cheese. Everything you've spoken in the last hour is now on record. And guess what? The police are already on the way. Mark's arrogance evaporated in an instant, replaced by wrath. He turned to face Chelsea. You claimed he was clueless. You said he wouldn't figure it out. Chelsea's face distorted in an expression of panic and frustration. How could I have known he'd suddenly become a secret agent? I laughed. A nasty sound resonated across the chamber. Secret agent? No. Chelsea. Just a husband who was tired of being lied to. The elder man finally spoke, his voice calm yet menacing. You are making a mistake, son. You do not know who you are dealing with. Oh, I know who I am dealing with, I remarked, moving closer. A former criminal, a con artist, and a betrayed wife. Did I miss anything? The older man's eyes furrowed, and he turned to face the third man with the muscle. Take care of it. The man began to approach me, but stopped before he could get too far. The warehouse doors slammed open. A squad of police officers stormed in, filling the space with flashlights and shouting, weapons drawn. Jake had kept his word and called in the cavalry. As soon as things became dicey, "Everyone is down," one of the officers barked. The third man froze and gently raised his hand in surrender. Mark cursed beneath his breath. He looked like he wanted to run but knew it was pointless. Chelsea, meantime, stood there staring at me with wide eyes, her lips twitching as if she wanted to say something. "Officer," I called out, stepping aside to allow them to perform their job. "You can find all you need right here, recordings, documents, and a group of crooks who believed they could get away with murder." The officers moved in, handcuffing Mark and the others. Chelsea did not struggle when they handcuffed her, but her look changed to one of desperation. "Wait," she said, gazing straight at me. "Please, allow me to clarify. Explain." I snapped and cut her off. "Explain how you intended to kill me. Describe how you joked about it with him." I pointed at Mark, raising my voice. "No, Chelsea, you do not get to explain. You don't get to say anything. You're finished." She flinched at my venomous tone. Her mouth opened and closed, as if she wanted to argue, but the officers drew her away before she could say another word. After the dust had settled, I went outdoors, the cool night air hitting my face like a wave. Jake was leaning against the van, watching as police drove Chelsea and her companions away in squad cars. He called it a hell of a show. His tone suggested appreciation. "You handled the situation better than most people would." I shake my head. The weight of things is finally beginning to settle in. I don't feel like I've handled anything. I just don't know. I expected to feel better seeing them get what they deserved. But I trailed off, unable to find the right words. Jake clapped my shoulder. "It's normal. Betrayal like that does not simply evaporate because the evil guys are in handcuffs. It will take time." I nodded. I'm grateful for his solid presence. "Thank you for everything, Jake. I could not have done it without you." He grinned. "What do old war pals do?" As the last of the squad cars vanished into the distance, I felt a strange sense of relief sweep over me. It wasn't happiness, not by a long shot, but it provided closure. For months, I felt something was wrong. It felt as if the life I thought I had was slipping away. Now I understood why, and now I could finally start rebuilding. That night, I sat in my empty house, looking at the wedding photo on the mantel. The couple in the photo felt like strangers, naive, hopeful, blissfully oblivious of the tempest that will eventually rend them apart. I took up the frame and turned it over, sliding the photo out. For a time, I paused. I'm having flashbacks. Then I ripped it in half. The sound is clean and final. Chelsea was gone from my life. And for the first time in years, I felt liberated. The days that followed seemed strange, as if I were going through a fog. The storm of treachery, confrontation, and repercussions had ended. The weight of it all, however, hung to me like an imagined shadow. That Chelsea and her collaborators were being carried away in handcuffs seemed to bring me serenity, if not satisfaction. However, all I felt was tiredness. Betrayal does not simply break your heart. It undermines your sense of trust, your sense of self. Jake stayed with me for a few days following the bust, primarily to ensure that I did not spiral. I had no idea how much I needed him until he forced me out of the home for breakfast one morning. We sat in the corner of a quiet cafe, and for the first time, I began to understand what had happened. "You did the right thing," Jake replied as he tore into a stack of pancakes. "I understand it does not seem like a triumph, but you stopped them. They could have got away with it if you hadn't fought back." I nodded, prodding my eggs with a fork. "Yeah, but it does not feel like a victory. I gave her everything. Jake. Years of my life and my trust. And for what? To be played for a fool." Jake laid his fork down, saying firmly, "You weren't the fool. She was. She had a good thing, but she tossed it away for a con artist and a bizarre scheme. That is on her, not you." I sighed and leaned back in my seat. "I know you're correct. It is just. How can you move forward from something like this? How can you possibly begin to trust anyone again?" Jake didn't respond, and I didn't expect him to. Certain wounds do not heal rapidly. They require time, effort, and a great deal of soul-searching. But I sat there listening to my best buddy convince me I wasn't at blame. I realized something. I was not alone. I had folks who supported me and cared about me. And it was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the legal consequences of Chelsea's betrayal began to emerge. Jake and I had collected recordings and documentation that left no space for doubt. Chelsea, Mark, and their accomplices were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and a variety of other offenses. The case was sealed, and the prosecutor assured me that they would not see the outside of a prison cell for a long time. Chelsea's lawyer contacted me and asked if I would like to meet with her before the trial. I thought about it for only 5 seconds before declining. What could she say to make any of this better? Apologies meant nothing following an attempt to end my life. Instead, I focused on gathering up the pieces. The house we shared felt like a tomb for our destroyed marriage. So I sold it and relocated to a smaller house on the opposite side of town. It was a fresh start, something I sorely needed. I removed anything that reminded me of her. The photos, the keepsakes, even the silly mug she used to drink her morning coffee in. Every item I discarded was like removing a layer of dead skin. Jake assisted me with the relocation, cracking jokes and keeping the atmosphere light. When we finished unpacking, he gave me a drink and remarked, "Here's to new beginnings." I clinked my bottle against his, feigning a smile for new beginnings. The trial was terrible. I sat in the courtroom watching Chelsea try to show contrition. Her eyes were downcast. Her hands were folded neatly on her lap. Mark, on the other hand, sat with a smirk on his face, as if this was all part of a game. However, when the prosecutor played the recordings, their emotions changed. The consequences of their conduct finally appeared to sink in. Chelsea did not look at me once during the trial, not even when the judge pronounced her sentence, 15 years. Mark received 20. The third individual, whose name I discovered was Lucas, received 10 for his participation in the scam. The older mastermind faced life without parole. Justice had been served, but it did not bring about closure. I assumed it would. It did not remove the scars. After the trial, I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the steps, watching reporters press the prosecutors for statements. Jake waited for me by the car, leaning on the hood with his arms folded. "It's over," he said simply. I nodded. "Yeah, it's finished." Months passed, and life eventually returned to normal, or at least a new definition of normal. To deal with the residual animosity and mistrust, I immersed myself in work, pursued other hobbies, and even began attending therapy. It wasn't easy, but each day seemed like a small step ahead. One evening, I found myself seated in a local tavern, drinking a whiskey on the rocks. A woman sat down next to me and began a friendly discussion about the weather. Her name was Sarah, and her grin was real, open, and friendly. We talked for hours, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I felt a glimmer of optimism as I walked home that night. I realized something. Chelsea's betrayal crushed me, but it did not destroy me. I was still standing, fighting, and living. That was a victory in itself. Looking back, if there is one thing I've learned from this, it's that betrayal does not define you. It aches. It cuts deep, but it also shows you what you're capable of. It reveals who your true pals are, who you can rely on when everything goes apart. And it reminds you that even in your worst moments, there is a way ahead. So, if you're reading this and have ever felt the sting of betrayal, know that you are stronger than you realize. And one day, like me, you will emerge victorious. Here's the next story. We live in the foothills between Denver and Colorado Springs. Well, not quite the foothills. It's 20 kilometers into the mountains. The closest structure to our house is 3 miles, as the crow flies, or roughly 12 miles by automobile. Look up remote in the dictionary to see a picture of our cabin. I'm not sure why all houses in the Highlands are called cabins. This is a huge house. Living like this brings you much closer to nature. We travel the trails and collect edible mushrooms, nuts, and berries on our walks. We would be myself, Landon, and my wife of 12 years, Cheryl. I'm proud to be the geeky amateur mushroom forager. I cook at home and use practically anything we find on nature hikes. I was out walking alone today to let off steam and shout. My thinking is so jumbled right now that I'm not sure what to do. We talked last night. Honey, we need to discuss. Near a lingonberry bush, I discovered a rare and poisonous mushroom growing. If this is what I suspect, it's known as a destroying angel and is quite toxic. Less than an ounce can ruin your liver and harm your kidneys. What makes this one extremely lethal is that the early symptoms can readily be mistaken for diarrhea if left untreated for even 2 days. You will not recover and will die in excruciating pain. Unfortunately, people do not equate diarrhea with mushroom poisoning, so by the time they seek care, it is too late. The destroying angel mushroom is completely white, with a smooth stem and crown. It has a ring-shaped membrane toward the top of the stem and is slightly bulbous at the bottom. I saw 3 of them, and each was a textbook case. I dashed home, grabbed some latex gloves, and returned to collect the lethal little animals. When we were going steady, I put them in a little cooler. Cheryl harped on loyalty and how her father had ruined her childhood. Her mother had divorced him and turned her children's minds against him. My uncle had divorced his wife, and it was the closest I could approach to understanding what Cheryl was going through. Regardless, the thought of sharing Cheryl purposefully or unintentionally disgusted me. We both made it clear that infidelity was a game killer while dating. We agreed that our sexual history was just that, the past. Cheryl was too good at pleasing me to be a virgin, even though I wasn't one. I had entirely neglected learning how to delight women. I've greatly improved, or at least Cheryl has convinced me that she is attractive and shapely. She landed a television commercial shortly after graduating from high school, but her acting career came to a stop. She is presently a project manager for an information systems and computer skills training company. She is quite involved in the women in government movement. I'm merely a corporate accountant. Boring, but it pays well enough. I've always been known as Mr. Geek. I knew deep down that if I had $1 for every woman who felt I was too geeky to date, they would eventually want to date me. I'd watched from the sidelines as the ladies rushed for the money. Fortunately, Cheryl recognized my talents, and we were now enjoying life together. Talks about starting a family became increasingly frequent. Honey, we need to discuss. I kept hammering around the interior of my skull. Your life flashes before your eyes. An overpowering grief falls on you, happily ever after, maybe not so joyful. I sat on one of the stools at the kitchen's island counter. Cheryl had no tears and did not appear to have been crying. Her expression struck me as determined. I'm sitting. Go ahead, I responded. I know we never discussed our love lives before meeting. We agreed that it happened in the past. I'm embarrassed to admit that I was a bad girl while I was attempting to start my acting career. I spread my legs to land the television advertisement in which I starred. I wasn't always successful at spreading them. And I'm concerned about it now because I suspect one of the agents who was intimate with me is attempting to blackmail me. She responded. It's not as if she hadn't previously captured my interest. But I sat upright. How is he attempting to blackmail you? I questioned. I answered a call on my cell phone from what appeared to be my mother. The caller ID indicated it was her. It wasn't until I hung up that I noticed the phone number was not my mother's. Anyway, the guy stated he had a video of me that was ready for sharing. He recognized the birthmark on my inner thigh. Landon is a relatively unknown figure, so he says if I treat him well once a month, he'll keep the video private. I dreaded what was to come. What have you done since he approached you? I questioned. I told him to call back tomorrow. I just hung up the phone with him. What did I do? I am doing it now. I am telling you. My heart pounded in my chest. Inside, I was chanting, yes, yes, yes. Come here, I answered. We shared kisses and hugs. Were you aware it was being recorded? I asked, but had no idea. I'm not sure which agent this is. Should I call the police? She questioned. Hold off on that. I believe that footage will surface if things do not go as planned. Is there anything in the video that I would not approve of? Cheryl hung her head and tears started to flow inside. My chant had shifted to damn it, damn, damn. One of the agents had my back. I've never allowed you to do that. I despised it. It ached a lot. I'm not sure if it was this person. Everything else was normal love stuff. Sometimes there were two males. If you want, you can also have my back. Cheryl. Perhaps we can investigate that option in a different context. Right now is not the right time. We need a plan. I responded fiercely. I took shots until I was too inebriated to continue scheming. The only thing we agreed on was that when he called tomorrow, she would inform them that I wanted to watch when they met. That was the furthest from the truth. However, we decided that this would allow us more time to put an end to the threat. I took the day off and went out for a nature stroll. I returned with a tiny cooler full of lethal angels. Cheryl was back from work. He called again today. Did he agree to let me watch? I questioned. Big time. He stated if my wimpy husband wanted to learn how to love me, he'd be pleased to oblige. That jerk is dead. Who, how, when, and where remained to be determined. Cheryl and I spent the evening narrowing down our options for a private investigator. When we meet this blackmailer, we want to know everything about him and where he lives. I don't believe you're the only one he's pulled this on. He presumably has a place in his home where he stores the recordings. We must find a means to destroy that collection. Cheryl spoke with the investigator and informed her that we were planned an introduction meeting. Our intention was to give the investigator something to work with. As I considered what I could do to keep out of prison, I devised a strategy. Discovering those mushrooms was pure serendipity. Normally, I'd forward them to the Colorado Mycological Society, where a mushroom expert would validate their toxicity. Normally, when the blackmailer phones tomorrow, Cheryl invites him to supper on Friday night. We can use the picnic tables at the campground beside the highway. There's a grill, so I can sear some steaks. Trust me. There are no questions. Cheryl gave me that. What kind of nefarious activities are you planning? Look, trust me. Simply do it. Cheryl stated it took some persuasion, but the blackmailer agreed to meet with us. He mentioned that he would be accompanied by a bodyguard. That did not concern me. It was a long week waiting for Friday night to come around. The private investigator planned to have a drone record of the vehicles heading into the campground. Once our blackmailer was isolated, he would follow them when they departed. Cheryl and I were waiting by the grill when a pickup truck drove up. I had begun the charcoals when we arrived, and they were turning a vivid red. Some beefy carbon-based life form emerged from the driver's side and stood by the truck. He slipped his jacket back, revealing a holstered revolver on the passenger side. A regular-looking person emerged. His hair was smooth and pulled back into a ponytail that reached just below his collar. A goatee, earring in one ear, huge watch, and gold chains completed his smarmy appearance. Cheryl murmured, "That's Orlando." "It's nice to see you again, Cheryl." We exchanged chilly stares. "Have a seat. Can I get you some beer? How do you like your steak?" she asked. "Beer sounds delicious. Make it medium rare." "What are you up to now, Cheryl?" He smirked. Nothing piqued your curiosity as she placed the can in front of Orlando. "I chose this picnic table because there were small white mushrooms blooming nearby. Would you like mushrooms with your steak and salad? I noticed some just around your feet. Pull them off the ground and hand them to me." Orlando and Cheryl both gave me this look, but Orlando reached down and brought up 5 of them. I bit the head off one of them. "Damn, these are good." I made a point of chewing and swallowing the mushroom as I took the salad fixings and steaks from the coolers. I put on my latex gloves and diced 2 of the terrible angels. I returned the 3rd one to the sack, along with the majority of those that Orlando had harvested. Cooking does not reduce the toxicity of the mushrooms. I cooked angel bits for his steak. I tossed the rest into the salad and went for Orlando. I measured, and Orlando received 4 ounces of mushrooms. I added a generous amount of salad dressing and steak sauce, along with a couple crescent rolls, and dinner was served. I said to Cheryl, "Don't eat anything off his plate." Orlando smirked as he savored our hospitality. "I was thinking you should come back to my house tonight." "Cheryl, not going to happen. I will never go somewhere where you can videotape me again." "Nice try, jerk," she responded. "So let's return to your apartment. My friend will have to watch it too. You don't mind this, do you? Wimpy!" He smirked. I jumped in. "We're not going anyplace tonight. We're here to figure out what time and place works best for everyone." "Okay, let's meet at one of the motels I noticed along the interstate." "Why not tonight?" he questioned. Cheryl shot back. "Because I said so," I added. "I still need time to adjust to the thought of this. Let's meet there next Friday. I will acquire a room. Cheryl shot me, and I will kill you." Look. Orlando used his bread to suck up the remaining steak juices. Damn, those mushrooms were tasty. He looked around and noticed another clump of mushrooms at the nearby picnic bench. On his way back to his truck, he picked them up for next Friday. The consequences of backing out will not be pleasant. Cheryl. See ya, Wimpy. After the truck turned into the frontage road, Cheryl erupted. "What the hell is that about? There is no way I am going to meet him on Friday night. He will not be there," I responded, smiling. "He absolutely will not." "Why do you think he won't be there?" she questioned. "I guess you choose to trust me." "There are no questions." "I do not want to know, do I?" she asked. I just smiled at her. Orlando was slightly thrilled just thinking about Cheryl. She was much more attractive now that she had filled out a little. The thin little youngster in his video couldn't compare to this beautiful. He sipped another beer at the pub before returning to his pickup and his $50 date. After filling her mouth, he went home. After a few farts, he concluded that something I ate must not have agreed with me in the morning. Orlando made himself a pot of coffee and munched on the 2-day-old donuts. He spent the entire morning watching his adult film collection and attempting to use social media to find out where some of these idiotic women went. It was lunchtime when the first round of diarrhea began. Then it was 3 p.m., and by 5 p.m., he was absolutely drained. The stomach pangs were severe, but the scotch was overpowering all of his senses. On Sunday morning, his room stank. When he went to relieve himself, he discovered that he had pooped his trousers. His head hurt, his stomach remained uncomfortable, and his back was scorching. He rinsed off in the shower. Orlando ordered pizza for lunch, but an hour later, his stomach cramped so terribly that he considered heading to the ER. The screwdrivers he was soaking up put him out of his agony until around 10 p.m. He was resting against the shower wall, having ran out of clean clothes. He reconsidered going to the emergency department. On Monday morning, Orlando was found in a fetal position on the floor outside his bedroom restroom. When he attempted to use his cell phone, he was unable to stand. It slipped from his grasp and skidded beneath his bed. He was unable to reach it. Tuesday afternoon, his cleaning team discovered him unconscious and phoned 911. Cheryl's hired investigator discovered a wealth of information about Orlando, including where he lived. I kept checking the nearest hospitals until I discovered Orlando. It was Tuesday night. By Wednesday night, Orlando's whole house and possessions had been reduced to ashes. Arson is suspected. A half-dozen empty 5-gallon petrol cans provided a good clue. Cheryl had just grilled me, and she was quite frightened. Landon, it is Friday. What's happening in Orlando? I told you he would not be there. I said, we can have a nice quiet meal here. How about his threat? She questioned. Simply disregard it, I said. Cheryl was ready to add something else when her doorbell rang. Mr. Nelson turned open his badge so I could see it. That'd be me. How may I help you, detective? I responded. We have reason to think that Orlando Pierce consumed a poisonous fungus. He stated he picked several when we met for supper a week ago. The officer questioned. He did collect some wild mushrooms. I believe I still have some, as we did not utilize all of them. Come on in while I get them. I located the cooler in the garage and handed it to the detective. Here you go. How is Orlando? I asked about life support. I doubt he'll be able to make it this weekend. The cop responded. Cheryl's eyes sparkled. Let me know what else we can do to assist, detective, I inquired, disguising a smirk. Will, do you have a good evening? Cheryl waited until the detective's car vanished down the mountain. I do not want to know. I do not want to know. I do not want to know, was the chant I overheard. A naked Cheryl appeared before my eyes. Then she proceeded to give me the most amazing love experience of my life. When I inquired about Orlando's room on Monday morning, I was informed that he was no longer a patient. Wimp. That jerk. We heard back from both the detective and the Colorado Mycological Society. Can you believe this, Cheryl? One of the mushrooms was a poisonous angel. It killed Orlando. How fortunate are we that we did not consume one like Orlando did. The detective also stated that while Orlando was in the hospital, someone set fire to his residence. Talk about a streak of terrible luck. Cheryl was not buying it. I liked our romantic time in less than an hour. It was cute to hear her softly chanting, I do not want to know. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.